I flunked the test to get in. After all those guitar lessons my parents paid for, nobody taught me the tools.
What's going on, everybody? I'm Adam Johnson, and this is Cover Band Confidential. This week we are talking with hired gun guitar legend Jennifer Batten, best known for her work with Michael Jackson and Jeff Beck. We talk about how she got started with guitar and how she developed the skills to nail an audition with one of the biggest pop stars on the planet and one of guitar's true greats. Speaking of great, we just released a ton of new merch on our site. You can get these designs and a bunch of others by going to our merch store via the link in the description. Also, just want to remind you to go ahead and like and subscribe. Make sure you also enable notifications. We post new videos on this channel every Friday, and you can catch the full interview with Jennifer on our podcast. Hey guys, future me here. I'm in editing and just realized that I needed to acknowledge that I did get my haircut between shooting the interview and doing all of this, so viewer discretion advised. Let's get into it. Let's start at the very beginning. What made you pick up a guitar in the first place?
It was twofold. Part of it was sheer jealousy that my sister had a guitar and I didn't, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I asked my parents, I think Christmas was coming up, and I asked them if I could get a guitar. Back then, it was very unusual for a kid to get an electric guitar for their first guitar, and that's what I got. The second part of why I started was the Beatles. I was one of those kids sitting in front of the black and white TV when the Beatlemania came to America. That was it. I mean, everybody in my town was really into the Beatles. And, you know, I didn't know from guitar models back then. I don't even know if there was a brand name on the headstock. In fact, I sold that thing in front of my elementary school when I got my next guitar because I was thinking, well, why would I need two? I got this new one. I sold it for like $10, and I thought it was a good deal. That was the first time I ever sold anything, and what an idiot. I kind of wish I still had it. But
we all kind of pick up an instrument for one reason or another. When do you think in your journey guitar changed from just being a thing that you were interested in or something you were passionate about into something that could potentially be a career?
Well, I remember the evening I announced to my mother that I wanted to play guitar for a living. I was 12 years old. The only reason I remember it is because it came with a warning. She said, well, honey, music is a very competitive business. And I'm 12 years old, and I go, what does that even mean? I'm going to play guitar. You have no idea what an ass whooping is going to be coming at you for the next couple decades. No, you just evolve and experience different things, and guitar was always a part of my life constantly. I always took guitar lessons, and the family moved several times. My first teacher when I was 8, I was learning the first 3 frets and learning to read out of the Alfred book. Then when we moved, I ended up with a teacher that was into finger picking and had folk circles that would, once a month, they'd gather and read out of a book. Then the next guy was a rock guy, next guy was a blues guy. So I had quite a few different genres that I was able to taste before I got into Musicians Institute, which was just GIT at the time. I flunked the test to get in. After all those guitar lessons my parents paid for, I learned a bunch of songs and techniques, but nobody taught me the tools. Like, I knew my blues scales, but I didn't know diatonic scales. I didn't know chord scales. One of the things I was asked at the test to get into the school was just play a G major 7. And I played first position G7 because I didn't know there was a difference between a dominant 7th and a major 7th. So they basically said, you're not done cooking. You go back to San Diego and study with this jazz guitar player named Peter Sprague. And he whipped me into shape. Man, he had me playing Chet Baker solos and chord scales and inversions, and it was enough that 6 months later I was able to get into the school.
You left the Musicians Institute 79, 80, yeah. Is that about right?
Yeah, March 79.
So between 1979 and then getting the gig with Michael Jackson in 1989, what did that 10 years post-education look like for you as far as kind of building a reputation, getting out there, like establishing yourself as a musician in the marketplace?
I started teaching right away, which was really valuable. I mean, I think everybody should teach. It solidifies things in your head. It's one thing to understand it, another thing to play it, and a whole other brain process to be able to teach it. And that really locks it in. So I did a lot of teaching. My first gig ever, I made $12.50 playing at a hippie cafe with another guitar player reading out of the real book, doing jazz standards. Because that's where my head was at when I got out of the school. It was a very jazz-oriented school at that point. So I just integrated into the community and tried to go to any jam that I could. I eventually ended up in a a band that was my first real family band where you hang together, you do gigs for years together. And the thing is, I was really into fusion at that time. I was listening to Larry Carlton and Lee Ritenour and kind of a jazz snob. And I saw this band open for Lee Ritenour. And I go, man, they're a local band. They're doing originals. I want to be in that band. But I was too scared to call anybody. And like things happen when you throw that seed into the universe, they called me within a couple of weeks of that show and said, we need a new guitar player. I show up with this Gibson Birdland, and they had switched to cover tunes. So all of a sudden we're doing Police songs and Pat Benatar, and I got this jazz box that is completely inappropriate for the gig. We were all young, and I'm sure everybody sucked back then, but it was fine with them. So bam, I was in the band and spent a lot of time and evolved and got chops on stage and learned to get past the absolute fright, because when I went to the Guitar Institute of Technology, I think I'm the only student that had never had a gig before. I would do my guitar lessons and play in my bedroom, and that was it. There was a massive evolution in just a couple of years with my first band.
You know, thinking about guitar players now and kind of the journey that a lot of them go on, there are way more of those, you know, bedroom musicians who haven't cut their teeth doing, you know, live performances. It's kind of nice to know that it's not necessarily a new thing. It's something that, you know, we all have to kind of go through. You know, I was cutting my teeth at 15 years old playing crappy gigs and stuff in, you know, in our friends' basements. Do you think that played a part?
I just relished being in a band, and I would put in a ridiculous amount of time making sure I got every nuance of every part of every song to the best of my ability. Having said that, I wouldn't ever want to hear myself back then. You know, I mean, you grow so much, and you think you got it back then, and then 20 years later you listen and go, no, I didn't have that. In fact, I remember one of the covers we did was Owner of a Lonely Heart. I didn't have a harmonizer, and so I would try to do the intervals with my fingers. You know, I thought it sounded good, but I fired it back, that song back up again with this cover band, and I'm playing it properly with the harmonizer. And I think back and I go, that couldn't have sounded good.
Let's say back in, you know, the mid 80s, what kind of tools were you using to slow things down and kind of like pick pieces out? Like how are you going about that process?
It was brutal compared to what we have now. At one time I had 2 Marantz cassette decks, which you know, you could slow the motor down. I guess the easiest thing would be to go a whole octave down so you're not changing pitch, but a lot of stuff, if it gets too muddy, you tune it down a fourth or a fifth, and then you have to transpose it back. I wanted to write out all the solos of Van Halen's 1984 record, and I had one Marantz cassette deck playing things at an octave down, and then to get the rhythm, I played that live onto another Marantz deck and took that down. It was ridiculous, like, but when I was recording it over, I was taking my fingers and clicking them on the machine so I could hear 1E and 2E, and because his rhythms are insane. I mean, he'll do a flurry of 9s and 13s, and trying to write that out is, I probably need therapy from that project, you know? There's a ridiculous amount of patience. I don't know that I would ever do that again, but that's what I went through. And also certain songs, I'd say more jazz kind of songs I was trying to learn that I could not figure out what the chords were. I plugged a cassette deck into a rack harmonizer to try to boost certain frequencies to hear them. And the effort I went to was ridiculous. And now you can do that with an app called Transcribe. You know, it's like, boom, one button, you get rid of the bass, another button, you get rid of the vocals, and it's the closest thing that you can do to not having the actual masters of a track. Yeah. It's as close as you can get. It's just a pet peeve of mine, because I have spent so many hours transcribing things. When I hear a cover band that's playing the wrong notes or the wrong chords, it drives me up a wall, and I run out the door. You know?
You are in very good company here.
Yeah.
Well, having said that, there's different levels, right? There's the people that their ears aren't good enough to actually know what's on the record, and they do their best, and there's an audience for it. There's an audience of people that don't really know the difference. Then there's people that can nail it. And then there's people that can take it further than that. Like, they can get it exact, but they want to mess with it and make it original and make it a little more exciting because they're playing it every night and they might get bored with stuff.
How did you get in the running to get into the room to do the audition to get that gig?
That was really lucky. It was kind of funny because when I moved from San Diego to LA, it was motivated because the bass player in my cover band decided to move back to LA. That's where he was from. And it seemed like immediately he got a gig with Johnny Rotten and Public Image. And so the rest of us are going, well, we want big gigs. We want a tour. We want to know what that's like. And so we all trot one at a time up to LA. I ended up sleeping in his garage for 3 or 4 months before I got a place of my own. I was in the Musicians Union in San Diego. And in order to join the Musicians Union, at that time anyway, in LA, you had to come into the union and sign into this book every Monday for 6 weeks to prove that you weren't from somewhere else and just taking advantage of the fact that LA has the most lucrative, money in the union. And so every week I'd go in and I would look at the gigs book, and it was a big book of offerings, and I would see weddings and parties and bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. And finally I just talked to the guy behind the counter and I go, where are the cool gigs at? I'm in Hollywood, man. Where's the tours? And he just kind of chuckled and said, it's who you know. And he was right. How I got information about auditioning from Michael is one of his people called up Musicians Institute, and I was teaching there at the time. They said they wanted 2 people from that place, and they auditioned about 100 people in the city, and I was the lucky winner. I just canceled everything for 3 days. Got my first CD player because they were pretty new at the time, so I could hear things more clearly. I asked what songs I should know, and I don't remember, but it's probably the top hits that were on the radio. And then I went in, and there was no band. It was just me and a video camera. The only guidance I was given was to play something funky, because that would be 95% of what was asked of me, is just grooves. And so I improvised something. Then I started improvising more of a rock-style solo. And I had done 3 demos for my first record at that point. And one of them was a tapping solo worked out for Giant Steps. And so I played that. And then because I had been playing Beat It in the cover band, and I thought he might find that useful, I ended with that. And next thing I know, I got a call that Michael was interested. And it was a matter of coming down and playing with the band and see how it goes. And they never told me I had the gig. It's just they never sent me home.
Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, don't forget to like and subscribe. We post new videos on this channel every Friday. We have over 140 episodes of the podcast, all designed to help you rock more and suck less. Have an awesome week, and we will see you next time.